Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming to the first Ask an Alum event sponsored by CAMP. So today we have 5 alum who are here to talk to you about their alternative career paths after graduating from the College of Chemistry. So I'm going to have them introduce themselves and talk about how they got to where they are and what they do in their day-to-day roles. So Angela, let's start with you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Angela Tsao. I am in the Bay Area. I'm a 2013 graduate, chemical engineering major. And shortly after I graduated, I joined Agilent Technologies in South Bay in Santa Clara as an inside sales, so not a technical route immediately after graduation. After 2 years, I actually moved to Illinois to be an outside account manager for Agilent as well. I sell basically analytical instrumentation. So I moved out to Illinois and cover for the Midwest area. And I'm for 3 years, and then I moved to Minnesota. I joined VW Art there for 2 years. And then I moved back to the Bay Area in December 2020. I rejoined back at Agilent, and I've been here since, almost a year and 3 months. So been moving around a lot. So just a quick info of myself.
Great, thanks, Angela. And for any attendees, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A and I'll ask them for you at some point. All right, so Sarah, if you want to go next.
Sure, Sarah Grantham. I graduated with my PhD from chemistry. I was a chemical biology student in 2009. From there, jumped pretty much straight into life sciences and health services consulting. So did not go the postdoc route, but essentially got the bug for healthcare services. And now I'm the vice president for Aetna for Medicare network. So I'm responsible for strategy operations across all of our provider networks, ancillary hospitals, you name it, for Aetna nationally. So happy to be here.
Great, thanks, Sarah. And Bill, if you want to go next.
Sure. 1985, I graduated with a chemical engineering degree. And instead of being a process engineer in the chemistry or oil and gas industry, like many of my colleagues, I embarked on a career in management consulting. Began a career with Accurex. It was a kind of medium-sized consulting firm in the energy environmental space. We were bought out by a larger global firm called Arthur D. Little. And long about 2002, I sought out an MBA. And during my MBA, I decided to open up my own consulting practice, which I operate today, called Market Potential, that helps entrepreneurs in the clean tech space, as well as clients who are looking to engage in the carbon markets. That's it.
All right, great. Thanks, Bill. Doug, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, Doug Fung. I graduated in 2012 in chemical engineering. After graduating Berkeley, I went to Procter & Gamble to start my first job, making toilet paper of all things, living the life of a chemical engineer, during which I spent a couple rotations in different jobs, working on the product, working on the packaging, doing a little bit of the marketing before deciding that I want to try something different, and moved over to the sales analytics space and moved to Minneapolis for that with Procter & Gamble. Learned a little bit of sales, and then decided that I wanted to change again. And then took a call from a recruiter that said, hey, I think you'd be a great fit for supply chain. Didn't really know for sure what that meant exactly off of a sales and R&D career background, but took it anyways, which brought me here to Boston, Massachusetts, which I'm calling from today. After 2 years with Wayfair in their supply chain analytics group, really helping build out Wayfair supply chain network, I decided to move on to management consulting, which is another little story we can spin into, which was about 5 years in the making to get myself there. And today I'm still with the Boston Consulting Group, starting my project leader tenure.
Awesome. Thanks, Doug. And then Anne, we'll wrap up with you.
Hi, I'm Ann Pease. I earned a PhD in chemistry in 1990. At the time, the only degree you could get was chemistry, but the focus was really biophysical chemistry. After that, I did an NIH postdoc, but rather than doing it at the NIH, I was lucky enough to do it here in the Bay Area at a small biotechnology company called Max Research Institute. And I was focusing on making the very first gene chips. From there, when I was in the company, I saw all sorts of interesting things going on that related to both business and law, and decided to make a switch into law. So I went to the dreaded Stanford Law School. And after I got out of there, became an intellectual property attorney, and I focused on that for over 20 years, ultimately becoming the head of the global practice in a very large law firm that had, I think, 900 attorneys worldwide with 13 worldwide offices. Retired a number of years ago and have been focusing on actually using my chemistry to make bean to bar chocolate and chocolates.
That sounds really great. So we don't have any questions from our attendees yet. So I was wondering if you guys all would like to talk about what aspects of your STEM training you still use in your jobs despite not being in traditional STEM careers. And you can go in any order you'd like.
Since I teed up that question, I'll go first. So I work in health insurance, now healthcare services. Sadly, don't make anything in a lab anymore other than my kitchen, which I still call my lab now. I think the biggest thing, even though it's been a very long time since I've done traditional research and worked in a laboratory, is still the way of thinking like a scientist, the hypothesis-driven thinking of thinking up the question, thinking up a pathway and series of steps and things you need to follow to validate or invalidate your hypothesis and objectively go through that process. That is a very translatable skill in so many different careers, but I think it's not appreciated until you've been in through further scientific training, and you may not even be all that conscious of it. But I think that would be a big piece of advice I would share, in general, as you think about how do I make use of my education or my research experience or, anything I've learned in a STEM field. Just that way of thinking is not necessarily how our friends who are English majors and, history majors and whatnot are taught to think. And so I think that's a big value add that you can bring to any career. And it certainly served me very well because I'm considered a very objective, methodical, process-oriented type of person and thinker. And that structure now feels natural to me, having gone through years of scientific training. It is unnatural to many people. And I think it's not a skill you appreciate until you're in a more non-STEM type of environment. So that's probably my biggest, value add that I continue to cling to, even if it doesn't involve blowing anything up in a lab.
I think that's a fantastic answer, Sarah. That is my undergrad. That's the number one thing I got through. In my career, I've spent a lot of time evaluating new and different technologies, and so in doing so, I'm always thrust back to first principles. So using all those first principles, whether it be something as easy as a mass balance or the law of thermodynamics and stuff like that, is something that I go back to quite frequently as I'm looking at new clean technology.
I think we're in a
I
trend
was
of
lucky enough to
building-
get to use it every day. The clientele that I had were pharmaceutical companies, biopharmaceutical companies, biotechnology companies. And whether we were involved in procuring intellectual property in the way of something like patents for those clients, or defending clients against lawsuits by others, or bringing lawsuits, oftentimes you'd have to work with experts. And these technical experts most frequently were Nobel laureate scientists. And so I would have to draw on my STEM training on a daily basis, working with the experts at a very, very high level, both within the company and dealing with our outside experts. And also just evaluating patents and understanding the technology that underlie the patents on behalf of clients. So it's, I think, wound up being a very nice match between how I like to think in terms of I love the law and applying the law, but the facts that underlie the law in intellectual property happen to be scientific facts.
I think building on what Sarah and Bill shared, a lot of the mindset applications really do hold true. And I'll build on to that by saying that the element of trial and error that you go through in that iteration cycle that you think through as you go through your chemical engineering, chemistry training, those are actually quite good because it puts you in a mindset where you're willing to change. You adapt to things that are uncertain, things that you don't know. And coupled with that first principle mindset, as well as that structured way of thinking, that combined is a set of traits that a lot of people are looking for. They're looking for people who can adapt to uncertainty, can adapt to changing circumstances. And a lot of that is the training that you're getting. And another way that I've told people this is I spent some time working on supply chain topics. And one explanation I gave people that my training provided was supply chain is essentially like the most basic mass balance you can do in chemical engineering. There's no transformation when it comes to things going through a supply chain. Parcels go in, parcels go out. So it's like the simplest problem ever from a chemical engineering point of view.
Yeah, I would say in sales, even though I'm in technical sales, like it's not directly like say chemical engineering problem solving, but like what everybody say here, the logical thinking step, the process, like how you identify. Sometimes, we have new customers that have absolutely no idea what they're doing. They're just jump in and say, I want a box that can do this. And then you have to understand where they're coming from and, ask the right questions. And having the science background really helps about like doing some research. Sometimes they're doing completely something new that you can also help research and have that discussion on your end. So I think, just the way how you think, it's definitely very beneficial through the course that you learn as a chemical engineering, chemistry, or chem bio major.
Great, thank you. So I was also wondering, when did you know that you wanted to take a more alternative career route? I know some of you touched on this in your introductions, but when did you know that that's what you wanted to pursue instead of the more traditional routes that it sounds like all of you kind of started out in?
I can start. I decided that junior year. So that junior year is when you kind of need to decide whether you want to go grad school or industry. And so I made a decision of going to industry. And why I went into sales instead of process engineer as a chemical engineer is because I took also other classes at Berkeley, and I think it's really beneficial right now as an undergrad and at College of Chem at Berkeley itself. You can network and take a lot of different classes, with really no extra money spent. You can go to a lot of networking events. There's a lot of entrepreneur events in San Francisco that's only $5 for students versus for professionals like $200, $500. It's like, take advantage of those. Go to events. Right now, there's a lot of virtual events, even free for students to attend. So by going to those and talk to alumni, I realized that actually I do not want to be a process engineer or going to grad school, because that's not my short-term goals in 5 years. I wanted to do something more in the business side, in sales side, in marketing side. So that's why I chose sales after graduation.
Yeah, I see another question pop up, which I'll try to meld the two. In a way, opportunities will always exist. There's always more opportunities than you will know what to do with. And I think the best way to like really fact check that is if you ever decide to get a business school, you'll realize there are just way too many career opportunities out there that just seem like interesting. And you won't have enough lifetimes to do them all. So I think the most practical bit to think about is might be a joke that we had when I was doing some consumer research work with Procter & Gamble, which was you always want to survey enough people till you get the answer you want and then stop. Because that way, like you're not going to spoil your results with like other inverse results later on. As much as I'll also affirm that Procter & Gamble does the rigorous scientific studies, for yourself, I think you should keep in mind that there's always more options out there. And what you're doing for your first career is not something you're like signing in stone. If I look back at my career, I graduated 10 years ago, and nominally I did like 4 very different things during my career, from R&D to sales to supply chain to now management consulting. And each of those were, if you average it out, would only be like 2-year increments. So, you know, you're really only making a decision for yourself for a very short amount of time. And as you do that trial, I'm sure you'll see more and more opportunities unfold along the way. And for myself, a lot of what happened with me was a combination of push and pull factors. The reason why I made both of my career moves within Procter & Gamble was more driven by opportunities that were or weren't available to me at the time. And that precipitated my departure from Procter & Gamble. And then my leaving of Wayfair was more of an interest-driven, or again, I guess it would be, I didn't really see myself long-term in that sort of role. So I felt like it was time to try something new. And I think all that is to say is you're going to have any number of reasons to do any number of things. And there isn't going to be one way that's too right or wrong, as long as, you know, it's something that you're willing to go try.
Yeah, I think for myself, there are a lot of options, career options that I could have taken, and I didn't have a good idea which way I wanted to go. So summer jobs became my sort of trial and error way of figuring this out. I took a job as a process engineer one summer, and I learned I didn't want to do that. I went down the next summer and I worked for IBM, who was, in those days, they were kind of the Apple at that time. And I learned I didn't want to be in the electronics or semiconductor arena. And so now it's about time to graduate, and some postings came up about this management consulting position. I thought, well, yeah, maybe that sounds kind of interesting. And I gave it a shot, and it worked out for 30 plus years now.
Yeah, when I was an undergrad, I really did think I wanted to be an academic, you know, so for me it was, yeah, okay, do I look at med school? I kind of humored med school like many a chemistry major does. You know, parents are in healthcare, but enjoyed doing research, felt like that was going to be the right path. I'd, you know, done a little bit of teaching as an undergraduate. So I was really excited thinking that this was going to be my path. I was going to be a professor, you know, Sarah somewhere. Get to Berkeley, it's huge. The teaching load is enormous. I taught Chem 3A, was the head GSI for, you know, Chem 3A. So my enrollment total was 1,100 students across 2 different lecture periods. So anything that went wrong 1% of the time was still 11 people, you know, and multiply that by the number of 1% situations. And it became a little bit less about teaching and more about sort of firefighting and troubleshooting. But what I did learn was I was very good at grant writing. I was very good at coming up with new ideas, helping my lab mates, you know, solve problems, think through their experiments. I was not a very good experimentalist, I'll be honest. You know, I would get frustrated, and I was, you know, got things through, you know, got all of my PhD work done. So managed to graduate, but I think some of that was sympathy and, you know, a job well done for helping write a bunch of grants. But I had taken some business classes. You know, the Haas School is right next to the College of Chemistry. and got the same kind of bug of, okay, I can go try other jobs. I can do management consulting. And I had a lot of transferable knowledge in the life sciences. So it was an easier transition to say I did have technical knowledge that I gained during, my PhD work. But as I built out other skills, kind of like Doug was saying, you learn business, you learn finance, you learn what else is out there. And then, if you look at my resume now, it's kind of zigzaggy in some ways with different types of roles that I've taken. So I would just echo, I think what Doug said as well, is you don't have to feel like your next decision is there's only one right decision out there, versus there are probably many right decisions or many paths. It's fun to think about if you made a different decision, what you're doing in a parallel universe. But I would also say generally, try not to stress as much about it, versus think about what makes you excited to come to work today, even when things aren't going very well. If your experiments are failing, or if you're having a tough time learning something, I think if you're still passionate about the subject and the people you work with, you're probably in a very good place, and you're going to continue to learn things, in that role. And I do think in the economy we're in, and it's much more of a mobile economy. So if you aren't happy, or if you want to be doing something else, you don't have to be scared of moving. It's just then the where and the how.
There are many paths, and it's okay to change. And you can see that by all the great people in this panel.
I think my experience certainly didn't come as a surprise to me that I decided to make a career change. When I was deciding whether or not to go to graduate school in chemistry, at the same time I wanted to be a lawyer back then. And I actually took both the GRE and the LSAT, the entrance exam to get into law school. And I couldn't decide then which I wanted to pursue, but it came down to a very practical consideration. And that is, if I went to graduate school and wound up saying, gee, I think I'm going to change careers and become a lawyer, I could do that later in life. That had already been demonstrated by others. But if I tried to do the reverse and pursued law and then said, gee, I think I want to go to graduate school, it really wasn't common for somebody to later in life say, okay, I'm going to go to chemistry graduate school, at least not back in the Stone Age when I grew up. I think it's a little more common today. So I decided to take the practical choice and go to graduate school first. And then I found myself absolutely loving research, which came as no surprise to me. I couldn't, like Sarah was just saying, you jump out of bed excited for something, even if it's not your best day. Well, I used to just jump out of bed waiting to solve the next problem. And then I kind of noticed over time, I wasn't jumping out of bed to solve the next problem. A lot of my chemistry involved the studies of the structure of large biological molecules. And I started reading papers that said, two atoms were 2.2 angstroms away rather than 2.9 angstroms away. And I found myself really not caring too much. And at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, I was doing a postdoc in a biotechnology company, and I saw a lot of exciting things going on around me, both with respect to law and with respect to business. And I think that when I realized I was no longer jumping out of bed to think about chemistry, but jumping out of bed to see what the lawyers were up to, it really portended the fact that it was time for me to make that career change.
I saw another question in the chat about just concern about making changes, kind of being a parent, sort of being a student later in life. I think that's number one, it's illegal to ask about someone's, family status and all of that. So I think your willingness to disclose when you're talking about jobs about your family and your choices is up to you. In some company cultures, it's very welcome, but it's technically not legal, for them to discriminate against you on the grounds you have children. I do think you need to be honest when you're looking at jobs around hours and commitments, and same thing with, any sort of career you're pursuing. What are travel requirements? What are you expected to be in an office? When are you expected to be there? How long? I think more of those practical questions are probably more relevant, and more of a way to think about what you need in the stage of life you're in, as opposed to some of those specific factors. I think it's a good story when I see people who've made changes in their career and they've been successful at those pivots. You know, if they can explain that story and, you know, show kind of, here's how I made this change, why I made this change, why I went back to school, what have you, to me, that shows adaptability. It shows, you know, their desire to be doing something that they're good at, passionate at, you know, that they can then bring into a role. So I think a lot of those types of changes are really how you spin it in terms of, you know, job interviews and things like that.
I just want to mention that in my field of intellectual property law, it's very common for the lawyers to have PhDs, postdoc experience, and then have worked for a while. So not only would it be highly usual for somebody coming in to be in their 30s, it would be expected because you would just need that life experience. That would be the suitable life experience for that particular profession.
Well said, both of you. Let me add, too, I mentioned that I got an MBA, but what I didn't mention is I began that journey when I was 40. So I was, you know, well into my career at that point. And here's the thing, I wasn't the oldest one in my class. There were 5 people that had a good 10 years on me. You know, so you know, you're as old as you want to be or not, you know, and you know, it's about what you make it, you know, so I entered an MBA at that time because I wanted to change what I was doing, to focus more on business, and it's about making that change work, and as Sarah said, sometimes you have to spin it a little bit to you know, increase your hireability.
Yeah, I'd echo what Bill is saying. A lot of it is how you set the space for yourself and your life, and making sure that the work can work around your life. I mean, the way I see it is, also when I was doing my MBA, I vividly remembering one week showing up to class and, you know, like, how are you doing? And then one of my classmates was like, oh yeah, my wife just gave birth yesterday. And I was like, like, you seem to be in the wrong place at the wrong time right now. But yeah, there are things that people do to make things work. I mean, during the MBA program, we saw people with almost any number of children. Right now I'm in management consulting, a fairly demanding kind of career path in terms of just hours and attention span. And our partners have any number of children as well. There's definitely a element of making sure the work can work with your life, which is kind of the thing that I think particularly I found that as I've gone more tenure and as I started my BCG career, quite frankly, I've been more attuned to transitioning from corporate, where the work hours were a little more relaxed. I kind of knew that, hey, if that's the lifestyle I want, I need to make sure the work and the life kind of have to fit the way I want it to. And even though there were fresh graduates or 21-year-olds who are at the same tenure as me, and they might want to work 10 hours more than me, I'm not going to be them. And as long as I communicate that upfront, I haven't really encountered any pushback on, you know, within reason, that should be allowed. And that's probably more of what we'll see in the future. If you just look at the world today with Zoom and how much should work be remote versus in person, and if you project out 10, 20 years, I mean, most studies would say all of us will probably have to learn something new in order to be well tooled for a second career or something of that effect as well. So there's definitely no stopping this trend.
And yeah, just to add something, if you're thinking you're an undergrad and you're like, okay, I'm someone with kids and competing with someone who are fresh out of college, you can also use it as an advantage. Like, you have more life experience, you know, the way you handle stress, you know, especially during COVID with the kids, with the school, everything. I mean, like, as a parent, the stress level you handle is definitely different than you know, someone who's a regular undergrad student with parents, you know, help. So like, you can use your life experience as an advantage. Don't see it as a disadvantage, see it as an advantage and how you can navigate that. And of course, like commute is very important for you. Like Sarah mentioned, find a job in the shift hours that fit your family. And then, when doing the interview, don't feel like it's a disadvantage. Make it as an advantage for your situation.
Great, thank you all. We had another question in the Q&A box. I know Doug touched on this a little bit, but do you have any advice for educating yourself about what types of alternative careers people could take, or how would you find other alternative careers? Like, how would you find the career you went into if you hadn't done, like, taken an internship or taken a job where you saw that firsthand?
For me, I didn't take an internship or industry job. I actually was working in research lab every summer because I really wanted to go to graduate school. And how I actually ended up not doing that was because there was a lot of different, info session, a lot of the Bay Area around. I kind of just Google search for like the entrepreneurship events, marketing events, networking events, even hackathons, like programming events, just to go there and see what people are pitching ideas, how the work environment is like, and attending, like what Sarah said, Haas Business School is right there. There's a lot of advantage you can take to take other courses as a junior, senior standing. You can do that, and just go to all the info session there is, not just limited by the College of Chemistry, but offered by other students group, other colleges as well. I think just using the Berkeley, also the alumni network. I attend a lot of alumni events and see a lot of panelists like tonight and also others. Kind of like made me think, oh, there's actually another job, like different kind of titles that you can go into. Some jobs I didn't realize they exist until I kind of speak up and kind of ask around and just network. So don't be afraid. I would say just don't be shy and try.
Yeah, I think Angela's right. Absolutely. Go out and explore and learn, whether it's through the alumni, through the school clubs. There are lots of venues to learn. I think the other thing I'll push you towards as you go through your search is really understand what it takes to get yourself there. I'll give you an example. Boston Consulting Group, the firm I work for, we normally hire undergrads of all shapes and majors. And the trick there is, if you were to ask me, how would you get into management consulting? I would point you to the Haas undergrads and say, like, there's your competition, like, know how much they're going through. And I know Bill is smiling because he probably has a sense of what people go through. And that's to know, like, we're not saying it's going to be easy. We're saying that you need to understand like what you're trying to do on top of the, does it interest you bar? And as long as you're willing to put yourself out there to go do it, I've seen people who have come from all sorts of majors get into management consulting or any other type of career. You just need to kind of know what is the bars and puts and calls that come alongside the job that you're looking for.
I think the other just advice I might give is, what else are you passionate about? So if you're in a STEM field, you're passionate about science or mathematics, and that's a part of you and you've been good at it, you enjoy it, and you're trying to figure out what you want to do with it. I think the other question is then, well, what else? What else do you like to do? And is there some kind of natural intersection there where some people love politics? And so when they think about science and politics, there's public policy, there's, all kinds of different groups that are, again, that marriage of two, in theory, very different places, but ultimately they have to come together for a very specific purpose. I briefly, as an undergraduate, went and did a semester abroad and studied art history. And so I had this moment of intensive career chasing of, do I want to be an art restorer because it requires a fairly robust chemistry skill set, but a great love and appreciation of art. Quickly realized I did not have the patience for that. But it was a fun mental exercise and sort of, inquisitive exercise to say, could I find these two passions and actually make a career out of them? So that might be another way to think of, are there jobs, are there companies that represent two of the parts of you or more, depending on your passions, and see if that helps you start, your evaluation list of potential career paths. It probably won't immediately give you the answer. And I think Doug's point is really well stated, of understand what the application process is, what they expect of someone at an undergraduate versus a graduate level. Because in some industries like management consulting, they have a very systematic way of evaluating talent and bringing in people. Not every career pathway is like that. And so depending on what you're trying to pursue, those are great questions to ask, whether it's at job fairs or, you can say basics. Oh, do you like to hire STEM majors? Why do you like to hire STEM majors? What's your evaluation process looking like? I think those are perfectly acceptable questions to ask as a way to learn more about an organization and how they value someone with a STEM type of background.
When I realized that I wanted to become a lawyer, I didn't know what kind of lawyer I wanted to be. So I had to do a little bit of due diligence on that. And I leaned on alumni from both my undergraduate and graduate schools just by cold calling. I did research on people, what they were doing. I picked up the phone. I said, gee, we went to the same school. I've read a little bit about your background. It looks really interesting to me. I think I might want to do that. Do you think we could get together and have coffee? I'd really like to pick your brains and find out more about your career. And I couldn't believe how gracious and generous people were with their time. Nobody turned me down. And then I always had a rule in my career that if anybody called me, I would extend them the same courtesy. And it was actually something that you see quite a lot in law, that people are very, very generous with their time to sit down with you and talk about what they do. So for me, I found that just making the calls was sufficient. I'm not a natural networker, so it was, for me, the way that I chose and opted to go.
Also kind of go back to it. It doesn't have to happen in one step. If you find that there's something you're very interested in, keep the connection, right? You might not be the right fit today, but that doesn't bar you from 2 years from now becoming a better fit for that. I'll give you an example from my career. I think I off and on flirted with the idea of going into management consulting and actually struggled to get through the full interview process, in part because if you go through an R&D training, the way you're kind of taught to explain things or do certain things are kind of running counter to how a strict management consultant would approach things. And unlearning some things that I learned took a little longer for me than it did potentially some of my other peers. And so I think the first time I tried an interview for management consulting was 2014. And then subsequently I tried again in around 2017 before finally getting in 2019. So there's definitely an element of time that's on your side where, as you build more skills and get your career more and more in line with either the level of expertise you need, the way you have to operate in order to do that job, you'll find yourself there as long as you want it, and that's something you want to pursue.
I like that concept of unlearn. And I had that experience as well, where you think of an academic research paper, it's, here's my hypothesis, my introduction, and it's data, answer at the very end, or conclusion, or the so what. Business and many other kind of non-STEM fields is the complete opposite. It's give me the answer first, and then I'll tell you if I want any of the data. And that was very hard for me as well to unlearn. So I'm like, what do you mean? You don't want all of my data points? You don't need to hear every bit of evidence that I have? You don't want to hear all of that? Oh, that's shocking.
I know, it's spent so much time on it and they don't want to hear it.
Exactly. So keep that in mind of, you've got some training, but it's also going to be an adaptation when you look at an alternative career, because now you're learning a new process or speaking a new language in some ways, and you've got things you can bring to that, from a STEM background, but that's not the one right way to do it. And it may not be, again, the standard in that industry. So finding that balance is important. But I I absolutely struggled with that for many years, and I still struggle with it because I tell everyone I love data. You won't take the scientist out of me. I want to see the numbers. I want to be convinced by the numbers. And that can annoy people, frankly, at times, because they're like, just believe me. It's like, trust but verify. Show me the numbers. So real issue, unfortunately.
Yeah, I will relate too. You think like when I was selling instrument, if I create the best data, competing against my competitors, I will convince the customer that, you know, they will buy the best product that's out there. But that's not the case. Really depending on, sometimes, you know, it really depending on other factors that you have to consider. And also depending where people are from. If they're in the Midwest versus Bay Area versus East Coast, everybody reacts differently, looking for different things. But, you know, always learning, always learning.
All right, great. And then, so we don't have any more attendee questions right now, but I was also wondering, this was prompted by Bill earlier, but were there any summer jobs or internships that you had either during your undergrad or while you were getting a graduate degree that really pushed you into what you were doing today or really pushed you away from a more traditional career? I know Bill already talked about this a bit, but if the rest of you want to chime in as well.
Yeah, I think I mentioned I joined a research lab as an undergrad pretty early. And so I pretty consistently just stayed in the lab and just continued to build experience. So that was great because, again, it taught me a lot about how to be an experimentalist, how to set up, you know, a multi-step, you know, kind of process that I was going to try to test and see all the way through. And for me, it just solidified at the time of like, oh, I think I can do this, you know, and I think this is what I want, you know, so grad school is going to make sense. And so I think that's the other, you know, just interesting thing to keep in mind is you still may feel very fully committed in a direction for a period of time. And I think Anne said this well as well. And, you know, when do you start getting less excited in the morning? And that was okay. Again, it wasn't like I wasted any of that time. But I mentioned, you know, study abroad and other things. So I did do other things as an undergrad. I didn't necessarily put all my eggs in just one basket. I also took the MCAT. I briefly looked at combined MD, PhD programs. You know, I tried to think about a couple of different avenues, but at that point, you know, I was still convinced that, you know, some type of graduate program was absolutely the right next step. So it's, you know, I would have failed that where do you see yourself in 5 years question, because I would have said, oh, well, I'm going to be a postdoc or I'm going to be, you know, doing this. And again, that was okay. So I think it's, you know, that would just be my continued message of even if you do things and you feel like you're down one path, that is not wasted time. You know, it's just where you wanted to be, you know, for that period and make the best of it. And then if you want to make a change, more power to you.
Yeah, so for me, I did 2 internships with Procter & Gamble, and you know, both of them really had very little to do with chemical engineering now that I reflect on it. The first one was around consumer research to design better bath tissue, essentially. And the second one was modeling paper structures, which is actually much more a mechanical engineering thing than a chemical engineering thing if you had to do a strict classification. Unknowingly, I think both of those things kind of set the stage for a lot of the later career pivots. The former really set the stage for me doing a lot of consumer understanding, consumer outreach, that like sales marketing kind of bent. I kind of discovered that, oh yeah, that's something that's really cool. I really want to learn about how the business puts together this product that we just kind of talk about, oh yeah, you want fluffy bath tissue. Well, what does fluffy mean and how do we sell that? That was very cool on one end of the spectrum. And then the other end of the spectrum, getting exposure to the idea of doing like quantitative modeling really helped my sort of mid-career moves within and outside of Procter & Gamble, because it really gave me a lot of credentialing for saying that, yeah, this guy understands like how to structure a modeling program and how to run a team around like delivering these modeling objectives, even though I had like no idea what the new language I was like leading teams to go do was, I at least understood the principles of how it should look like through the different steps. And those became the transferable skills that I was able to take on to different career paths. And really, I guess the thesis of it would be like, it opened my eyes to the idea that I could do other things besides what was strictly told to me as what a chemical engineer should do.
I'm going to answer the question, I think, slightly differently, or maybe a slightly different question. And that is, I've had a number of things in my life that have sort of shaped the course of my life. And I'll just briefly touch on what they were, and you can see the sort of things that can shape your life in certain ways. I grew up in a very small factory town in the Midwest, in Wisconsin. And I had a summer job at one of the factories, and I was packing boxes at this place called Northern Labs, which produces things like shampoos for all the generics and all these branded companies. And I absolutely knew I was going to go on to college the day the foreman came over to me and said I was packing boxes too quickly and making everybody else look bad, and I needed to slow down. And I thought to myself, well, if doing a job well gets you in trouble, I don't think this is the place for me. So off I went to University of Wisconsin, was majoring in chemistry. One of my professors pulled me aside and said, I think you'd really excel at doing undergraduate research. He said, and I can set you up with some professors, just let's talk about what your interests are. So we talked about my interests. He set me up with a professor to do some undergraduate research, and I did some undergraduate research for 3 different professors. And doing that let me know that in addition to having an interest in law, I also had very much an interest in going on and doing research in graduate school and taking my life in that particular direction. So I did that. Ultimately, I wound up deciding to go into law, and it turns out that if you have a scientific background, there's a lot of opportunities for you when you're a law student to work in law firms as a law clerk in the intellectual property departments. So I did that. I worked as a law clerk and did mostly patent application drafting, which is quite difficult, I have to say. I mean, a patent application is a legal document at the end of the day, but it does cover a scientific discovery, and you have to figure out how to turn it into an invention in a way that, looking at the law today, it satisfies the law today, but since you're not going to enforce the patent for 15 years down the road, you have to sort of figure out where is the law going to be 15 years from now and kind of hedge your bets. So it had a lot of complexities to it, but at the end of the day, it gave me an opportunity to look around within the law firm and see some things that to me were very interesting, that were a little bit different from just patent procurement. So that sort of shaped my life in terms of where I was going to go in with my legal career. And what I found is, when I think about things, every time I look back and I kind of reflect on my life, I can see different events that have happened that have shaped my life in various different ways. And it's not necessarily that I was looking for those things to happen. They just kind of did. And whenever they did, I took full advantage of them. And I think wound up having a career experience and a life experience that was very much enriched because of them.
I think that's also a good point, Anne, because there are going to be people who are very supportive of you, and there also might be people who say things that are the opposite. And I think I've had experiences of both. I did have a pre-med advisor when I was an undergraduate tell me I was not mentally equipped to handle organic chemistry. Well, my National Science Foundation pre-doctoral fellowship would disagree. And to this day, I kind of feel really proud of kind of sticking it to that particular advisor who had no idea what he was talking about. But that could have been an incredibly damaging statement had I not been as stubborn as I am. So I would say, think about any sort of detractors and is more of a little bit of a test of what do you want to be doing? What do you want to prove to yourself? But then I have, the positive end of the spectrum of, faculty who I now call friends and, people who were wonderful supporters of me making career changes and whatnot. And both have been instrumental in some way of here's what I don't think you're capable of doing, and then here's what I think you're capable of doing. And I think Anne's point about making the most of any of those situations and making your own choice, you know, in response to either a lot of great support or in some cases, people who aren't supportive, but you're going to do it anyway. So just some things to keep in mind, because I do think those people also shape a lot of where you want to go. And I think having some of those other folks to bounce ideas off of, bounce questions off of, people you can go to and say, here's how I'm doubting myself. What do you think? You know, should I be more cautious? Should I take a risk? I'd say also look for those people that you feel comfortable, you know, just sharing where you are and, you know, getting advice, and then it's up to you to decide where you want to go with it.
Yeah, to go off a little more about what Ann was talking about, as I got in my career, I was given opportunities to take on more management responsibility, management of people, management of budget, other financial aspects, and I took advantage of that and found myself moving in that direction throughout my career. But that's an example of like what Ann was saying, when you're presented with opportunities, you can take them on and they become part of what you're doing.
All right, thank you. I don't see any new questions coming in. So if any of you have anything else you'd like to add before we wrap this up, you can go ahead and add it now. And if not, we can all sign off.
I guess something to add is feel free to reach out if you have any questions. I'm sure like Bridget will provide our contact. So I'll be happy, like what Anne said, you know, if you're thinking about exploring different things, all the alumni are very happy to talk to you guys. We're all very friendly. And so, you know, don't be afraid to reach out if you have any questions.
Same here. If you need an informal interview, I'm happy to chat.
All right. Well, with that, I'd like to thank you all for coming and talking to all the students today. I think this will be really, really helpful. I really appreciate you all taking time out of your days, especially since you're not all on the West Coast. And I know that time difference can be rough to the East Coast. So thank you all for coming. And yeah, feel free, students, to reach out to me and I can provide you with contact information for the panelists. All right. Well, thank you.